All right, so teaching big concepts can be something that's a little bit tricky at the beginning, but again, with more practice, it'll definitely come easier with time. And for now, I'm gonna give you guys just some helpful tips for what to do when you are teaching these big concepts. So one of the biggest things that you can do and to help you really get your point across and really get your students to focus, we talked about one of those things already, the idea of just working the room and not standing in one place. Physically changing your position from where you were to a new spot now forces your students to refocus. The other thing that's a huge, huge help in order to stress what it is you're talking about is to slow down your pace. The minute that you do that, you will literally see that students, maybe who weren't paying as much attention before, or, fallen asleep or whatever, hopefully not, but all of a sudden they'll refocus just hearing that your tone has suddenly changed. And that's a really big one. I definitely have a habit just in terms of pace in general of kind of rattling things off and talking really fast. That's just how I talk naturally. And so this is definitely something that I have to be super mindful of, in particular when I'm teaching a new concept or a big concept. Even just with everyday talking in a class, I gotta be mindful of it too, but here it's even more important. So slow down whenever you can. The other thing is that you should ensure that they understand what you are asking. So if you're asking the class questions and let's say they're not giving you any sort of response, you ask a question and you're not getting any sort of answers, well, part of the reason could be that they don't understand what it is you're asking of them. And I find that will usually happen if you ask a question that's a little bit too general. Okay, so you want to be maybe a little bit more specific with the questions that you're asking, so try asking it again. Get questions and get feedback. That's important too. Ask questions and get feedback. Get them to show and teach you whenever possible. So after you teach a concept, let's say the idea of aperture, just as an example, get them to show you and get them to teach you. So review is a really good thing to throw into your lessons whenever you've just finished a really big topic. So after aperture, I might say to them, okay guys, let's review everything that we just talked about. So what's the aperture? Where do I find it inside the camera body? How do I change it or control it? Why would I adjust it? Kind of go through all these points, letting them and providing them the time to answer you to make sure that they're understanding. The other thing that we can do too is make sure that they are showing you their results. So don't assume that they're just on the same page as you. Don't assume that they're knowing what they're doing. You kind of need to check in on them. So a place where this is super important is if in any of your classes, you're going through a section where you're teaching them a setting on their camera. So let's pretend it's white balance. And I say, okay guys, I want everybody to find their white balance button on the back of their camera body. I want you to push it and go into your white balance menu. Just saying that isn't enough. After I say that, I'll give them a minute to find it. And I'm going to check in with them after the fact. So then I'm literally going to go around the room and say, okay, can I see your white balance menu? Awesome. Yeah, you're in it. Are you in your white balance menu? Just show me the back of your screen. Okay, fantastic. And just go around the room and check in with everyone just to make sure everyone's on the same page and you're not losing anybody at this point in the lecture. And if they aren't getting it, try explaining it in a couple different ways. So we talked about the idea of using an analogy and the idea that you want to use your best, strongest analogy at the beginning, but always have these backup alternatives in case that doesn't work. Always have backup explanations in case you need to take another approach, a different approach to the way that you originally explained something. So that's really important too. Okay, so that's teaching big concepts. Answering tough questions can be something really tricky at the beginning as well. My biggest tip and most important thing to remember when trying to answer tough questions is to stay confident in the moment, okay? We never want to fake an answer. We never want to make up an answer. Don't do that, but just stay confident and reassure that the person who's asking you the question, if you don't have an answer, that you will find one eventually. So a lot of the time what's good to remember is to give the person who's asking you the question a reason why you might not know it. And that's fine. You can't know everything that there is to know, so it's okay if you can't answer their question immediately. So something that I'll do is I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm looking for a setting on a camper's camera. That can be tricky. So you are trying to find how to change their autofocus mode, and it's not where it normally is. Relay that to the student or the camper. So I would say, okay, yeah, that's every camera model is a little different. Usually the buttons are on the back of the camera body on the very top, and usually the button says AF on it. So your camera doesn't have that, but I'm sure it's there. I just need another second to find it. Maybe it's in a menu. So kind of just like walk them through it and talk them through it as you're looking for the solution. You could say, you know what, a camper might ask you a specific question about a piece of equipment or a setting that you've never realistically used before, and that's fine. You can say that too. You can say, you know what, I've never used the tracking focus on my camera before. I'm not really sure how it works, but let me Google it or look it up when we have a break or when we, at the end of the day today, and I'll make sure to answer you tomorrow morning. That's a really good thing to do. I was teaching a travel photography workshop a couple days ago, and a guy was asking me all these questions about tilt-shift lenses and photographing architecture, which I've never done. And so I kind of said that to him. I was like, yeah, I don't really know what to look for when you buy a tilt-shift lens. I don't shoot a lot of buildings. When we have a break later, let me Google and see, what tilt-shift lenses are recommended. I also gave him the link, okay, since I don't know too much about it, a really good website to use might be dpreview.com. I use them all the time for product reviews, so if you're looking to buy a tilt-shift lens, that could be a good resource. So you can always give them kind of like another helpful tip if you can't answer the question directly, but always try to give them the answer if you can, even if it takes some Googling and some research. All right, so our next topic is definitely camp specific. Not too big of a priority if you're teaching adults, but for camp, yeah, we definitely want to consider this. Just the idea of authority versus fun and finding that balance as an instructor. And it can be a tricky thing to kind of navigate at the beginning. Let's think about age groups as well. So I would say that with any age group, actually, if it's kids and teens, if it's kids or 8 to 12-year-olds, if it's teens 13 to 17, it's still important to find this balance. We always want to have a fun attitude because, yeah, I mean, we're at camp, as I said before, as much as we're educational and as much as we're teaching students something really important, we're still at camp and we still want to maintain that fun vibe, but it is really important to understand and recognize when it's important for the safety of the campers, for their experience, for your experience as well, to recognize and know when you need to be firm with them. The biggest thing, if you're having to get firm, if you kind of have to lay down the law a little bit, is that don't get emotional. And that can be hard. You might be frustrated. You might be at the end of your line as well, but you can never let that show. It's super important for you as the instructor to just be logical, unemotional, and really just, get down to the solution and how to fix whatever problem is there. In terms of trying to fix problems, you always want to, as much as possible, address situations aside from the whole group. So a really good example of this would be if you have, let's say, an individual camper or maybe a couple campers that are creating some sort of difficult situation for whatever reason. So I'll give you guys an example. I teach the adult classes here, yes, but I was a kids camp instructor maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. And in one of the weeks that I was teaching camp, I had a camper who just wouldn't stay with me on field trips. We'd be going on a field trip and he would run into a building, go the opposite way down the street. And it was, a time where I recognized, okay, for his safety, this is really important that he needs to listen and he needs to pay attention. So in that situation, I pulled him aside from the group, not in front of everyone else. The other thing that's important when you are getting authoritative is to physically get to the camper's level. So don't stand above them and talk. This was like a 9-year-old kid. So I think we both sat down and I kind of looked and talked to him eye to eye and explained to him why what he was doing was an issue, and we talked about a solution. So that's important too, is that just don't do this in front of the rest of the group. If it just concerns one individual, then just have a one-on-one with them. The other thing to keep in mind is that there is nothing wrong with bringing the camp director into any of these situations where you're needing to be authoritative, you need some support That's why the camp directors are here, right? We're here to kind of back you up, give you some help when a situation might escalate to more than you can handle, give you some advice on how to treat the situation. That's fine too. So just always remember that we are here in order to help and guide you. Be proactive with the campers and with any issues that you might be experiencing. So if you see something starting to happen at the beginning of the week, instead of maybe letting it slide for a couple days, really try and manage and maintain it at the beginning, and so it doesn't escalate to anything that's bigger. Being proactive can again also mean relying on camp staff like a camp director to give you some support. If a situation needs to come to it, we'll call a parent and say, hey, this is what's happening with your kid at camp. It's really disruptive to the rest of the group. Maybe you can help me and give me some suggestions on what to do and handle the situation. And I've done that as a camp instructor as well, and I found it was really helpful. So always communicate too. That's something else important to remember, is communicate that you're having these difficulties with, again, camp directors, so that we can keep an eye on it for you, that we can support you. And, any of these concerns, they could be behavioral, health related, learning related. Just communicate these things to us as early on as possible. The other thing that I realized too as a camp instructor is that it's a lot easier, just in terms of finding that balance between authoritative and fun. It's a lot easier to start your week off as a little bit more of a firm, authoritative instructor, and then be able to relax as the days passed and you kind of gain the trust and respect of your campers, versus starting off as that really fun, easygoing, super easygoing, maybe a little too laid back instructor, and then you have to start getting firm at the later in the week. So start off more authoritative, and then you can kind of loosen up a little bit as you go, and as you know that your campers can handle it. So a couple tips on how to inspire. This is one of the most fun things you get to do as an instructor, and one of the most rewarding things you can do as well. Is that, we're here to teach these concepts and teach technical settings and lessons and things like that, but we're also here just to inspire these campers creatively. And so there's lots of different ways that we can do this. We talked about the idea of just talking from your own personal experience whenever you're teaching a lesson or a concept. That's huge. The campers want to see and know that these settings and technical things that you're teaching them are actually going to be applicable in the real world, and they want to learn a little bit more about you. Share what you love about photography. Your passion, and obviously all of you guys are passionate. That's why you're here. We want to spread that on to our kids as well. So definitely feel free to share that. Tell your own stories and personal experiences. Show them big ideas. If there's a photographer that you really love, show your campers the website. If there's a video that you saw that you thought was really cool, show them that too. I know you guys stay on top of this kind of stuff, and so it's really great to share that just for the sake of inspiring. Something else that I always love to think about and ask other photographers too in terms of inspiration is letting them, just going around the room, which we can't because you guys aren't here right now, but going around the room and kind of finding out from the photographers, can you remember the first photograph you ever took? Can you remember the first picture you ever developed? What was that picture? What was that whole experience? I love hearing those stories, and it is inspiring because for most of us, that's when the passion really started, and so it's really cool to hear those stories. So I wish I could hear your guys' stories. Definitely tell me in person at some point in time because I really would enjoy it. But just to kind of tell you the story, I guess, of me. I took up photography. It was always a part of my life because my dad always did it. My uncle was a wedding photographer, just grew up with cameras. And then I took a photography class in high school, which I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. It was like grade 10 media arts or something, and it was a darkroom course. And so the first picture I ever remember developing, not necessarily taking, was a picture. We had to go around the school and just shoot some shots on black and white film. And I took a picture of some crack in the pavement in the parking lot, and thought it was super abstract and cool. And I literally, clear as day, how many years later, I remember standing over this tray of developer in the darkroom and taking my little 5x7 piece of paper, dropping it in the developer, rocking the tray back and forth, and seeing this picture come up out of nowhere. It was amazing. And I literally remember standing there thinking, this is the coolest thing I have ever done. And pretty much from that day on, I was just like, no, I'm set. This is what I have to do. So yeah, stories like that. Share those experiences with your campers because again, I know you guys have some good ones. The other thing we want to keep in mind is the importance of judgment and thinking on your feet. So every situation is going to be different, so it is important to adapt to the needs of that specific group. So just as an example, if you're teaching a group and you notice, hey, these guys are really into portrait photography, they are really into shooting flowers, anything like that, don't be afraid to modify and adapt your schedule, your agenda, your lessons in order to really suit the needs and interests of that group. There's nothing wrong with that. So obviously though, if you plan on changing anything in your agenda and anything in your content, just let your camp director know so that if there's any changes logistically that need to be made, we can do them, and just so that we're aware that these changes are happening. Emergency situations, which you guys are going to get full training on, is another consideration to make when it comes to judgment and thinking on your feet. Without getting it into too much detail, really stay calm and look at things logically. That's the biggest tip I can give you. Again, we will get into specifics of it a little later on. Another really big part of using judgment and thinking on your feet is identifying when a camper might not be in the right camp session, and this definitely happens. So I'll give you an example. Let's say we have a camper who shows up for Teen Camp 1, which is our intro level camp where we teach full manual mode, and they're shooting in manual mode already. That would be kind of like a red flag and an indicator that, you know what, I don't know that this camper is in the right camp. Instead of Teen Camp 1, maybe they should be in Teen Camp 2 instead. So if you do identify that a camper is not in the right spot that you think they should be in, then speak to the camp director. Switching them to another session is not a big concern. It's something that we can definitely do. But again, you just have to communicate it with us so that we're aware. Camp directors aren't necessarily in the classrooms with you all the time, right? Very often they're not. So they might not be able to see that need, so you need to communicate it to them. And just to go into some general teaching tips now, just with the age groups that you guys are going to be dealing with as well. So general teaching tips for younger students. So our kids, 8 to 12, our teens, 13 to 17, basically anyone who's not an adult. These are some general teaching tips to keep in mind. So one of the things we want to remember is if you are using a prop or you're passing something around, so let's say you're passing a camera around as an example, don't pass it out too early, okay? If you distribute it too early before you explain the value of it or before you explain the point you're trying to make, once the campers have that piece of equipment or camera in their hands, they're kind of not really paying attention to you anymore, so always save that for the end. And just a general module for teaching that's really good to keep in mind is the idea and the order of introducing a concept, modeling it or demoing it, showing them visually what it is you're saying. Explore, so give them the opportunity to now take that concept that you've taught to them, that you've showed them, give them time to go and explore and experiment on their own, and then bring them back for review in order to kind of review as a group the results of what they just did. So that's really important there. Introduce, model, explore, and then review. It's a really good structure to follow. For camps specifically, it's also really good to have backup activities in case something falls flat. So that can happen. You know, you think that a demo is going to go really well or go over really well with the campers, and maybe they're just not interested in it. So you do it for about 2 minutes, and all of a sudden, the 30-minute time block you're supposed to fill with that activity, now you've only filled 2 minutes. Well, then what do you do? So that's why it's important to have these backup activities. You know, sometimes maybe the results just don't come out the way that you want, right? Maybe it's something technical and, ooh, today's actually really sunny. This would work a lot better on a cloudy day, but you can't change that. So you got to have another activity as a backup. So always have a plan A, and then always have a plan B as well. You never want to have any dead time. So we talked about this already, just in terms of prep for your day. You want to make sure that you've got everything that you need for the day, and that at the beginning of the day, you have as much set up as possible, right? So if you're doing a bouquet demo and you've got Christmas lights to do bouquet, at the beginning of the day, it's not enough just to have those lights with you in the room. Have them actually set up. So when you have time to switch over to that demo, it's not going to waste any time in order to set it up. So yeah, restless time is not good. And then a couple tips for ages specifically. So let's say that you're teaching our younger age group, the 8 to 12-year-olds. A couple pointers to remember here is that 8 to 12 is a really big age span. An 8-year-old is very different than a 12-year-old. And so in your group, you just have to be conscious of the ages of your campers, which will be on their attendance sheets, and know the age of everybody. How you talk to that 8-year-old is going to be a lot different than how you talk to that 12-year-old. The tasks that you give them, the responsibilities that you give them as well might vary too. So it's really important to be mindful of that. And if you have campers that are 13 to 17, what are some things to be mindful of? Be aware of their energy level. When it comes to teens, you will very clearly know if they're into something and if they're not. And if for whatever reason they're not into something, they're falling asleep or something like that, then you really got to mix things up to revive their energy level. So if you find that you have a lower energy level in the class, you need to bring it up, mix it up. So if I'm standing here talking, okay guys, you know what? We got to go outside. Let's go outside. Let's practice this. All of a sudden, that's going to change things up. Get them to stand up. Get them to be physical. That can help too, to wake them up. If you do have campers that are literally falling asleep in your class, and this will happen, go over to them and say, you know what? Get up and just go to the bathroom, or go get a drink of water, or go walk down the hallway and then come back. Again, get them to stand up to wake up. And then a clear sign that teen campers specifically aren't following you is they'll stop making eye contact. So you'll be talking about shutter speed, you'll be getting them to switch settings on their cameras, and all of a sudden you'll look maybe at a couple campers and they're not looking at you now. That's a clear sign that they're not following. If that's the case, if you realize that some of your campers aren't following, one thing that you can do is you can go through review for the whole group. So you don't have to single them out, but you can say, you know what guys, let's stop right now and let's just do a review one more time. And then doing that review again might be able to catch them back up. If I find that there's like 1 or 2 campers that also aren't following what I'm saying, then I might walk over to them, and as I'm explaining something, again, how to change shutter speed on your camera, on their camera, I'll actually do it for them so that they can see, and everyone else is kind of watching, just thinking that I'm demoing it for everybody. So that's a good tip too. And then ask a lot of questions instead of just telling them answers. Important as well. The teen groups can actually be pretty good in terms of wanting to give you answers. So just give them the opportunity to do that. All right, and then another or a couple other recommendations or tips for 13 to 17-year-olds is that sometimes you might get campers that almost ask you too many questions to the point where it's like disruptive for the rest of the group. Again, we always want to make sure that we're answering the questions that the campers have, but you might not be able to do it right then and there because you're having to cater for an entire group, not just 1 or 2 individuals. So if that happens, if you get a camper that's just constantly asking you questions and it's disruptive, you can say to them, you know what, I'm going to give you a sheet of paper and a pen. Whenever you have a question, I'm going to get you to write it down. Just because we have so much info we got to cover today that I really got to keep moving. But write down the question, and then later on, give me that sheet of paper, and I'll make sure I answer all those questions for you. And then remember that sometimes teens can be less likely to engage, participate in discussion, so they need a little bit more encouragement. Okay, it can really go either way. Sometimes you'll get groups where they just want to give you so many answers and so many opinions, and sometimes you get the quieter ones. So when you get quieter ones, you just got to be encouraging, ask more specific questions, even start off with like yes or no questions, because that's like a good intro to answers, and then eventually when they get comfortable, they'll feel more ready to give you like opinions and things like that. Okay, and the last thing that we're going to go through, or I guess 12th step of teaching tips, is running a critique. So critique is a really important component that we have in every single one of our camps, really. And it's an important component because it adds a lot of value to the content. It gives the campers an opportunity to share their work, get feedback on their work. But running a critique can be tricky sometimes. So a critique, first of all, in order to run successfully, it definitely needs a form of structure in order to run smoothly and also to engage students to participate. So the structure part is important. Normally what I do with kids and teens is before we go into critique, I kind of give them like a little breakdown of what the critique is, what it's going to entail, and kind of their participation in the critique. So I'll kind of say to them, okay guys, critique, kind of the explanation I just gave you, is really important for this, this, and this reason. Gives us an opportunity to do this, this, and this. So how are we going to run critique? So we're going to start off with everyone's going to have their images on a USB stick. So one at a time, I'm going to call on you guys. You're going to come up with your USB. We're going to put it in the computer, and we're going to pull up your images. When we look at an image, the first thing, or a great place to start, is to talk about our first impressions of the image and what we think is really successful. What do we like about that shot? After that, then we'll go into suggestions and areas of improvement. So just breaking it down to that, giving them, a little bit of a rundown as to what to expect really helps. And you can also, at that rundown at the beginning, make suggestions for how to talk about photos, right? Sometimes kids and teens, they don't know how to do that, and they need some encouragement. So you could give them suggestions like, when we look at an image, let's maybe comment on the compositional arrangement of the shot. We could talk about exposure. We could talk about focus. These are good places to start. Okay, other things is ask specific questions to give students direction with their answers. Again, they are more likely to answer this way than just broad general terms or questions. Okay, so just some other examples there of things that we can comment on. I mentioned composition, exposure. You can also get the photographer to explain what they were going for in the shot. So you could say, okay, what were you trying to achieve in this shot? What was your main subject? What were you thinking? You could also ask the camper, how did you get this shot? What did you do in order to get it? Did you have to choose a crazy angle? Did you get down low? That kind of stuff. So yeah, I think just as a instructor, the thing that you have to find a balance between when running a critique is the balance of you giving them enough guidance and you giving enough input that there's value there and that the critique's moving along, but also not just talking at them for the whole critique and really making sure that it's more of a conversation and that they're giving their opinions whenever possible. So that's really important. The other thing to keep in mind is we want to use a compliment sandwich. So always start with a positive point of feedback. I really like the shot. The lighting in it is amazing. Then throw in an area of improvement. Your focus, however, looks like it's a little bit off. So maybe your shutter speed was a little slow because it kind of looks like there's a little bit of camera shake. We could improve that next time, or next time when we're shooting, we just want to make sure that our shutter is above a 60th of a second. But I also really love that you captured the subject facing the camera, right? So start off with something good, area of improvement in the middle, and then finish off with something to make them feel extra good about what they've done. So running your critique, we're gonna try it. I'm just gonna flip to a couple images on screen and get you guys to think about some of the talking points that you might bring up, some of the comments that you might make for these shots. So this would be one example here. So here there's lots to comment on. We could talk about the shallow depth of field from a technical standpoint. We could talk about composition and rule of thirds. We could comment on the color. And again, we could turn to the photographer and ask them a little bit more about how they saw this shot. Was it set up like this? Did you arrange the bottles like this? Why are you shooting wine if you're a camper? Lots of questions here. And again, open it up to the class as much as you can. Okay, same thing here, very similar points. Depth of field, composition, color, lighting. Areas of improvement, what would you guys say for areas of improvement? I might think of suggesting rule of thirds instead of having the subject in the middle. I might suggest making the depth of field even more shallow if you wanted to see less detail in the background, just as an option. I find the hardest images to comment on are the ones that are really good and you're trying to look for, a suggestion to make it better, or the less strong images where you almost don't really know what to say. So this could be a good example of that. This picture of the horse, right? So here, just in terms of the compliment sandwich, I, might say something like, I really love your camera angle here. Did you take it seated on the horse? Because it's a perspective that I don't normally see, so that's really unusual and different. I think your exposure is a little overexposed. The corners of the image look a little bright, losing some detail. So if we just darken down the shot, so if our meter wasn't in the middle, we could get our light meter in the middle when shooting in manual mode, or even move our light meter so it's a little bit to the minus side, a little darker on purpose. I think that helped to bring back a ton of detail. But I really like that you can see the horse's face, like see his eye in this shot, because it definitely gives the viewer something to connect to. So that example, again, would be things I would say. And just one last example here too. Okay, so really great use of shallow depth of field. I think that's a really good choice to add some depth and add some focus to the shot. However, it looks like our focus might just be off on the main subject of the flower. It kind of looks like it's maybe on the ground or the leaf or something in the background. So just remember your focus points. You've got to make sure that your focus point is on your subject when you're taking the picture. Remember that you can hold your shutter button down halfway in order to do like the click and hold technique, which we teach in our Teen Camp 1 class. But the light looks really cool too. I love how bright it is and your exposure is perfect here. Okay, so another example of a compliment sandwich. Okay, so that's running a critique. So right now we've just covered our tips, our teaching tips for things for you guys to be mindful of and just kind of keep in mind in the back of your heads when you start teaching your own classes and doing your own lectures. Again, practice is everything as well. The more that you do this, the more comfortable you're definitely going to feel and you'll pick up things that work for you as well. But for now, just take into consideration all these points, things to remember as you get ready to teach your own camps. So thanks very much for your time, and yeah, I'll talk to you guys soon, so thank you very much.